there are growing signs that President Trump's MAGA base is fracturing, with high-profile defections by former Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and influencer Ashley St. Clair, and recent polling that indicates that the overall number of people who identify as Republican is shrinking. But for the diehard, leaving MAGA isn't easy. When you were a part of the MAGA movement, how deep were you?
I was as deep as anyone could have been. I was an aspiring MAGA pundit. I had bylines in places like Fox and The Federalist. I spoke at Trump groups. I was a donor on the campaign. I was unapologetically a MAGA and Trump supporter.
Rich Logis is the founder and CEO of Leaving MAGA, a nonprofit for those disillusioned by the movement. The group, which Logis says is funded entirely by small donors, provides support groups, de-radicalization resources, and a platform for members to share their experiences.
After I left in 2022, I realized that because MAGA is a community itself, to leave, I thought that I should build a community for people who also decide to leave. When I left MAGA, I had nowhere to go.
To get a better understanding of what makes people leave MAGA, we heard from an array of the group's members.
I grew up really poor, so a lot of my friends' parents would be responsible for helping me get to prom or making sure I had, new shoes for school, and they were all MAGA. And it was very much this constant conversation of, if you want to have nice things, be a Republican. Look at what we have, look what we're doing for you. They say Republicans are cruel and heartless, but look, I'm taking care of you. If I was cruel and heartless, would I do that?
I really wanted acceptance with my father, and my father was very much into Fox News, so that was something that we would connect on.
I became heavily indoctrinated into trad wife culture. Household voting was something myself and my fellow trad wives in the church, we were all absolutely fine with household voting. And that
so just to clarify, for people who don't know, household voting means the woman does not vote.
So the SAVE Act, in essence, is to take that right away from women.
In 2015 and 16, I felt that the two parties were the same, that democracy had failed most Americans, and that elected officials cared mostly about the wealthy and the powerful. And even though Trump ran as a Republican, I was very enticed by his outsider status.
From the timelines you've given me, you guys were all sort of on the MAGA train to some extent in 2020, right? At that point.
Yes.
When you heard Trump claim that the election had been stolen, were any of you like, yeah, they stole this election, Trump won?
Yeah. Up until fairly recently, when I left MAGA, I did believe that the election was stolen. I believe that the riots were actually, those were patriots.
They stormed the Capitol, and I'm like, well, yeah, I guess this is what you got to do if you have a corrupt, election process happening.
Until I actually switched off Fox News and started getting my news from other places, my information, that's when it finally hit.
Diversifying their news turned out to be a common factor in leaving MAGA.
I met my now husband in 2021. He is a black man, and he saw a Trump flag on my profile, and he was like, hey, could you read White Fragility? I'd really love it if you would. And I did, and it was very interesting because I was terrified of that book up until that point. And I read it, and it wasn't even as scary as I thought it was going to be. And they made me watch a documentary on January 6th, and I didn't even know what happened on January 6th prior to the PBS documentary. And I looked at him and I said, Scott, did that really happen? And he was like, where have you been?
It's so hard for people, because I said, it's not that you're dumb, you were fooled. That's incredibly hard to admit.
We are in the United States of algorithms right now, and MAGA media is very efficacious, it's very effective, and it's very disciplined.
Stefania became disillusioned when MAGA beliefs clashed with her understanding of medical science.
When I really began to wake up was during COVID. Because as a trained respiratory therapist with 5 children, the mixed messaging was something that finally broke through the cognitive dissonance, because I was hearing, wear masks. No, don't. They don't stop respiratory viruses, when I very much knew that they did.
Stefania would be forced to return to her work in respiratory therapy in 2022, when her husband contracted long COVID and could no longer work.
It all felt very karmic, like I was experiencing the aftermath of things I had voted for, downplaying COVID only for it to then hit us.
It's not easy to believe something firmly and then come to the conclusion that you've been wrong for many years. Was that hard for you, just on a factual level, to say, oh, I believed things factually that I now realize were not true?
Yes, that was something that I just couldn't square, because I couldn't be wrong, because I consider myself intelligent, knowledgeable. There was no way that I was wrong about it, and I held that belief for a long time.
You know, I had believed that when Trump ran that he would be somebody who would be different as an outsider. I think that he was correct in pointing out a lot of the flaws of our political system. It just turned out, unfortunately, that he didn't try to solve those or remedy those ills, that he exacerbated them.
Hearing you guys talk about MAGA and about supporting Trump, it sounds like you're talking often about like a cult that's damaging.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But he's the president of the United States, and it's not a cult. It's like the dominant political ideology of the United States in this moment.
You know, we all have a need for community. Our species yearns for a communal existence. And what MAGA does provide is a place where people feel seen and heard and recognized, and some of their very valid fears and concerns are acknowledged and validated. We used to say, we're not in the cult, the outside world is the cult, and we're not the crazies, the outside world are the crazies.
The group says that leaving MAGA often means losing relationships with loved ones, but it also teaches them to approach those loved ones with empathy.
When I left MAGA, like I said, I kicked the door open and jumped through. I had a heart full of hate. I hated everything about Trump, everything about MAGA, everybody that was in MAGA. Just hate, because I was pissed that I fell for it. So I would just go on the offensive and attack anybody and everybody that still supported it. And I've learned over time that that's not going to change anybody. In fact, it's going to push people over. So I've learned to be that empathy, that voice of concern, that caring voice. You can do this, I did it.
As part of leaving MAGA, there's really two outcomes that occur. The first is renouncing the lies, falsehoods, and conspiracies of MAGA politics. And the second part of it is that someone who leaves MAGA decides to build up rather than tear down democracy by making the continued case that we agree more than we disagree. You know, we're doing a billboard campaign right now across the country, and the message on the billboard is very simple, welcoming, and inviting, and it says, having doubts, you are not alone. And we have more people than ever who are in MAGA coming to us, asking us for help leaving.
Do you guys think that this group that you are a part of plays a role in this political moment, in the midterm specifically? Do you think it might have a measurable effect on the way that things go moving forward?
Every time we as a nation have been in a crisis situation, the way that we've gotten through it, the way we've pushed forward and progressed is by forming unlikely but necessary alliances. And everybody who leaves MAGA, there's a chance to form an unlikely but necessary alliance with people who have left. We are all living proof that it is possible to change.